not only is this our resources for the time being while we're here on Earth, it's going to be carried on into the future. And if we devastate this rangeland to where there's nothing out there, there's not going to be anything for future generations to come home to.
Talk a little bit about grazing periods, recovery periods, the need to plan in water, the need to monitor. We're talking about the whole situation. And another name for that is holistic grazing planning, where we take into account the needs for people, the needs for the animals, and the needs for the land, and try and make the best decision that benefits all three. That is not always possible. We may have to make some compromises to achieve our overall goals, but we try and not do anything that's going to deplete the long-term foundation for our business, which is the land and health of the land. If you don't keep that up, there's no way you're going to be able to keep the animals up, and then the animals can't support you and your lifestyle and needs for funds and that kind of thing. So we call that a holistic grazing plan because we try and take into account all aspects of the entire whole that we are managing for.
When Kurt's talking about these grazing plans, it's very important to be pretty strategic on how you maneuver your cattle around to best utilize the forage that's available at certain times of the year. And then you throw in the factor of where do you want to end up, so you don't have to trail them across your whole ranch. You can move them strategically, kind of like a chess game, or to where you end up near your shipping pens at the end of the year. And also, I know for me, sometimes different times of the year we have different available water resources. So, some places during the heat of the year, we'll put them in places where you can get more gallons per minute. And then when we start to lose the heat, we'll put them in places where there's less water requirements. And during the winter, you want to try to get them up into the tree areas for a little bit of cover, so they don't get as cold, kind of as a wind block. So there's natural things that you can use out here that will eliminate some of your costs.
So we are now in a run-in area. I wouldn't quite call it what we call riparian area, but it is an area of high productivity. If you look up the valley here, you can see the density of the grass and the height of the grass. In the average year, this year being way below average, but this area probably has the potential to produce 3,000 pounds per acre. The other areas where we stopped had lower potential. The first area where we had the monitoring point probably had, 1,100 pound per acre. The second area there we stopped that had the different species of grass and the winter fat probably had closer to 15 to 1,800 pounds. So we have various levels of productivity. And we'll have so many acres of each type that make up the entire ranch. If you were going to rate your productivity, how many acres are like this, basically it'd be all these little areas here. So it's not that many acres in the entire ranch, but these are not the same productivity as down there in the bottom. So when we go to determine the carrying capacity, meaning the number of animals that land base could support, we take into account the areas of high productivity, medium productivity, low productivity, and no productivity, areas that are roads or buildings, or that we're going to have just for wildlife, or tree cover is too heavy, whatever it might be. And from that productivity across the entire area, we can determine the number of animals, livestock that can be supported in an average season on that property. We can typically improve that with more pasture so that we can rest and rotate and give longer recovery periods. And that's the ideal situation like they have here on this ranch. However, even here, in a year like this where we probably had about a third of the average rainfall, it was definitely a very dry season. They made the decision to destock early and not run the full growing season in order to leave forage behind for the wildlife, and so there'd be something to come back onto in April when they bring the livestock back. So they were doing a carrying capacity analysis based on the amount of forage that they had left and their vision into next year when they're going to bring animals back for the next growing season. So that's one of the ways in which we address the carrying capacity, knowing how long to stay in one pasture, and the recovery period that's going to be needed, because these areas now, starting from beginning of September, won't have animals back in them probably again for at least 8 to 10 months. So they're going to have a long time to recover from the last grazing.
To assess how much forage you can produce, let's look at an example. This map shows a high productivity riparian area in green, starting at the top center of the map and splitting to each corner. This is surrounded by medium productivity areas noted in yellow, and then low productivity areas on the outer edges in brown. Suppose you assess the brown areas as producing 250 pounds per acre of forage, the yellow area producing double that at 500 pounds of forage per acre, and the green area producing 4 times the low productivity area at 1,000 pounds per acre. By multiplying each yield, 250, 500, and 1,000, by the respective size or number of acres of each area, you can get the amount of forage for your low, medium, and high productivity land. Add the 3 forage figures together, and you have the total forage productivity for your land. Once you have your total forage production, you can figure out how many days of forage you have available to graze. You simply divide your total forage by how much your herd of livestock will eat in one day. To get that divisor, you multiply the number of animals you have by the individual daily requirement. The individual daily requirement for an animal varies depending on the stage of growth and production, but let's assume approximately 2% of the average animal body weight. So by taking 2% of your average animal weight and multiplying that by the number of animals you have, you get the pounds of forage your herd will eat in one day, or the divisor in this equation. Then, by dividing your total forage by that divisor, you get the days of forage available. How many days until you run out of forage? This graph shows the impact of destocking early. The vertical axis shows the increased number of animals, while the horizontal axis shows the passing of time, or how many days until you run out of forage. So, for instance, during a drought, you only have a certain amount of forage left until it rains again. In this example, with 100 animals, you're going to run out of forage in 120 days. If you reduce your herd to 75 animals on the same date, your forage will last approximately 200 days. And if you destock to 50, then you will have forage for 270 days. The important point is that destocking early will allow you to keep the most number of animals in the best condition for the longest amount of time. Significantly, this lowers your risk by lowering costs of buying forage replacement or hay and preserving the value of your animals in case you need to sell more or keep them in a highly productive state. You are protecting the health of your rangeland to ensure future productivity and give the most time for conditions to change so that you can grow more forage when growing conditions return.
Ranching, there's a lot of things that are beyond our control, the weather and whatnot. So one thing that we have control over is our flexibility, and that's one thing that we can utilize are trigger dates. If we're not getting enough rainfall, there's a date that we need to set in stone that that we need to hit, that we'll hit, and then we'll start to destock. So it's very important to have a destock plan, or some kind of arrangements to reduce your need for forage. So that's one thing that I like to really emphasize is your flexibility. So a lot of ranchers I know, they'll keep a cow calf, rain or shine, throughout the year. If if it didn't rain, they're gonna buy hay. Maybe there's some instances where you manage stockers on your rangeland for a few months, and then you sell the stockers. There's different combinations that you can do. You can decrease the amount of steers you have, maybe wean early and sell early, or reduce some of the heifers that you're retaining. But those are some of the things that you have control over with management, and ultimately it'll benefit our forage production on our rangelands. So that's just something to think about, is to build some flexibility into your management. Maybe there's some instances where you manage stockers on your rangeland for a few months, and then you sell the stockers. There's different combinations that you can do. You can decrease the amount of steers you have, maybe wean early and sell early, or reduce some of the heifers that you're retaining. But those are some of the things that you have control over with management, and ultimately it'll benefit our forage production on our rangelands. So that's just something to think about, is to build some flexibility into your management.